invite you to the Goethe Institute's Wyoming building for this discussion about Martin Heidegger's Black Notebooks. I don't know if you have seen the newest New York Magazine's approval matrix. Here between brilliant and despicable on the highbrow side you find Heidegger's notebooks with one single word, oily. So we try to be even more serious and go into detail with the discussion about what these notebooks actually mean. Also in philosophical terms, the question of Heidegger's anti-Semitism is not an absolutely new one, but the question what these Black Notebooks say about the, say, anti-Semitic character of his philosophy might be of some new relevance. And you know there was a heated debate both in France, maybe even more in France than in Germany, and maybe in the future also in the US. And we're very happy to have experts here on the panel. Peter Trawny, the editor of the Black Notebooks. He's a philosopher at Berkowitz University in Wuppertal, and Roger Berkowitz from the Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and the Humanities at Warwick College. The first part will be a conversation about the book itself and what it might mean, and about the editor's perspective and the philosopher's perspective on it. And then we'll have a break with some drinks, maybe 45 minutes, and then a new round of discussions with Babette Barbich. Hello. Extending the subject and also, of course, answering to questions from you, from the audience. So enjoy this evening, and I give the floor to Peter and Roger. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are these on?
Yes.
Yes. You can all hear us? So, welcome, and thank you all for coming. I know there's, I don't know if there's any seats. If there are seats next to you, please raise your hand and some people will sit down. In the next few hours, Martin Heidegger will be heavily criticized. And this is deserved in many respects. But before we begin that exercise, I just personally want to remind myself and some of you that there's also reasons to read it. And when people ask me why Heidegger or why does one read Heidegger, I tell a story of the Mississippi River. What is the Mississippi River? Today we can say the Mississippi River is a river of commerce. We can say that the Mississippi River is an environmental disaster area. We can say it's a tourist. We can say it's a tourist site or attraction. And yet, when you ask, well, what is the river as the river, it's very hard to answer that question. Even if you try and preserve the river from environmental or other degradation, we now exercise our will over the river and make it what we will. And the river, in a sense, recedes from its significance. It's a river, it becomes what we want it to be for our use. Heidegger saw that happening not only to things, but also to man. And from my point of view, as I understand Heidegger, the question of thinking in his philosophy, the question of the Anwesenheit des Seins, the bringing of being to presence in man, in humanity, is an attempt to hold fast and to think about why man matters, what is man, and what is the meaning of man, what is the sense of man, not just as some tool or use for something else. One of the questions that we are going to have to discuss today is whether that thinking, that powerful thinking that has inspired many philosophers and thinkers and non-philosophers, I'm not trained officially in philosophy, is contaminated, as Peter Trawny at least suggests it might be in his book. And if it is, what does that mean and where does that leave us? I want to first of all begin now by thanking Peter Trawny for this amazing work that he's done, both in editing so far these 3 volumes of Die Straßenhefte, and also for his I should say mercifully short, readable, and enjoyable, although difficult in many ways, book, Heidegger and the Myth. Heidegger and the Mythos der jüdischen Weltverschwörung, Heidegger and the Myth of the Jewish World Conspiracy. Yeah. I thought I'd begin by picking two quotes out, one from the beginning of Peter's book and one from the end, and reading them, and asking him to explain, talk a little bit about them and explain his thesis. As far as I understand it, these two quotes in many ways represent the thesis or the argument of his book. So I translated one and I did the other late, so I haven't translated, but I'll work on the fly. But the first one, which is from page 28 in his book, maybe you want to read it in German just so we have it in front of us?
Yeah,
And,
of course.
Here you go.
Yeah, so I will read it, in German. Alles, was Heidegger mit dem Nationalsozialismus verband, entstammt dem Narrativ des ersten Anfangs bei den Griechen und des anderen Anfangs bei den Deutschen. Diese Erzählung bildet den Grund dafür, dass Heidegger die nationale Revolution begrüßte und sich in ihren Dienst stellte. Mit ihr verband er einen geistigen Nationalsozialismus, den er früh von einem vulgären Nationalsozialismus unterschied.
So the translation is up on the screen. You're welcome to read it. I thought I'd begin by asking, before we even, well, let's start with the first and second Anfang. Can you say a little bit about what you mean by the first and second Anfang and why that binds Heidegger to National Socialism?
Yeah, well, you see that these two concepts are concepts of Heidegger's philosophy in the 30s. So since 1932, one can think he's working on these both concepts. And what they are trying to say is that Heidegger thought that there are, on the basis of these concepts, two beginnings. One in Greece and the other in Germany. Two beginnings of what? Of course, on the one hand, the beginning of philosophy in Greece. That's quite clear. One can say that the pre-Socratics for Heidegger were the first philosophers. And then he really thought, and this is not only an idea by Heidegger, it's an idea by many German intellectuals or German poets and philosophers. He thought that there is an inner relationship, an inner connection between not only between the German and the Greek philosophy, but between the Greek culture and the German culture. So. He was thinking about it in the shadow of this revolution. He was thinking that he was, one could say, he was thinking of a revolution of culture revolution, in this sense that the German could repeat the beginning of philosophy on another level, maybe a different level, and then build in a certain way. A true culture. Heidegger does not like this word, but nevertheless we can use it here. So this is his understanding of an epochal turning of the whole history in relation to this national revolution. And the of course very strange point is not that the philosopher is thinking about these epochal breaks in history. That is called turning points. This is not the I guess this is not the strange point. But strange is that he was referring to this revolution with this philosophical idea. And this is in a certain way, I guess, this is the origin of his loyalty to the Third Reich. This is the beginning and the reason for his actual loyalty.
Okay, I just want to get the whole story out. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by the geistige National Socialism and the vulgär National Socialism? which are actually words, concepts that Heidegger employs in the Schwarzenhefte.
Yeah.
Or say what he...
Yeah, well, it's not so easy to figure out what he was understanding by saying this. The vulgar nationalism, of course, this belongs to biologism, racism, the blood and soil ideology, or ideology as such. These are things he's actually denying. He is criticizing. So this is what he, I guess, understood when he was building this concept of vulgar nationalism. But what is, how do you
I didn't translate it.
Spiritual
or intellectual.
National Socialism, intellectual. That's hard to say, but in this time he speaks about something he calls metapolitics. Suddenly he speaks about breaking up with philosophy, and that's belongs to his radicalism, to Heidegger's typical radicalism, breaking up with philosophy, and now we will have a metapolitics of a historical people, he calls that. And this metapolitics of an historical people, and that means, of course, of the people of Germany, this, I guess, is his concept of geistigen National Socialism. But well, what should that be? I don't know.
And I'm just wondering, are there other people who you would connect with what Heidegger takes to be geistige Nationalsocialism?
No, nothing at all. No.
So this is totally.
He's totally solitary. He's unique. He's in a certain way, of course, he's crazy at this point. You know that you cannot think that this is National Socialistic standard. What he was working on was actually for the regular National Socialist absolutely out of everything. He, for instance, he reduces his national or his sympathy for National Socialism with a great sympathy for Hölderlin. Hölderlin is the center of his understanding what actually he tried to do in the 30s, and now National Socialist was really interested in poetry. You know, that they were more interested in weapons and something like this. But he thought actually he could do it with poetry. So
do you have an opinion then? If someone asks you, it was Heidegger a Nazi, how do you answer that question?
Well, in this way that he was engaging himself for the party at the beginning of the revolution. Of course, he was a Nazi. That's not a question. But if you, for instance, if you think that whatever Röhm from the SA was a Nazi too, you can of course ask what is the relation between the National Socialism of Ernst Röhm and Martin Heidegger. And then, well, it was difficult. I don't think that Röhm read Hölderlin very much.
Okay. This is the argument at the beginning of the book. It introduces what I take to be Peter's argument, which is that Heidegger's National Socialism, which is clear throughout the book, the three books, is not a vulgar National Socialism. Not based in biology or traditional ideas of race and blood, but one based in a spiritual or intellectual project and idea. In a way, and this will bring us to the second quote from page 93 of his book, which I unfortunately didn't translate. Maybe you read it in German and then I'll do what I can in English.
Yeah, okay. Anders gefragt. Wie werden wir mit Heideggers seinsgeschichtlichem Antisemitismus im Verhältnis zur Shoah umgehen? Nun steht nicht mehr zur Debatte, ob man Heideggers politischen Irrtum gegen eine politisch korrekte und darum unwillentlich oder willentlich die Verhältnisse verzerrende Öffentlichkeit verteidigen soll, wenn man es kann. Es gibt einen Antisemitismus in Heideggers Denken, der, wie es einem Denker entspricht, eine unmögliche philosophische Begründung erfährt, dabei über 2, 3 Stereotypen nicht hinauskommt. Die seinsgeschichtliche Konstruktion macht es noch schlimmer. Sie ist es, die zur Kontamination dieses Denkens führen konnte.
I assume many of you actually speak German better than I do, so let me just summarize it if I can, unless someone wants to do this. If we ask in another way, how should we go about understanding his Seinsgeschichte, Anti-Semitismus, his anti-Semitism in a historically being kind of way in relation to the Shoah, what Peter, as I understand it, says is that on the one hand, there is an anti-Semitism in Heidegger's thinking, but it really doesn't go over very much 2 or 3 stereotypical expressions. It's not much more than that. However, the being historical construction, which is not a kind of racial or biological anti-Semitism, and it really isn't there very much in Heidegger, actually, in your opinion, makes it worse.
Yeah.
It is this philosophical, geistige, Seinsgeschichtliche Konstruktion that contaminates his thinking, or might.
Yeah.
And we have to think about to what extent it does.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate then on a little bit on that for now?
Yeah, we will see, I guess, in the other quotations what these stereotypes are. He actually Heidegger. You know that we had anti-Semitic quotations by Heidegger before in letters and so on, to his wife and so on. He was known in a certain way on a private level as an academic anti-Semite. But it's a difference if a philosopher then takes these stereotypes, these anti-Semitic stereotypes, and makes a philosophy out of it. And this is called being historical anti-Semitism, because in this time he was working on a history of being, and in this time suddenly this anti-Semitism becomes a part of it, becomes a moment of this history of being. And this is, of course, even worse than just have, well, it's bad enough, but it's worse for us that he takes these banal, these stereotypes and transforms them in a philosophical context and tries to make a philosophy out of it. So that's the point, I guess. What is dangerous for the whole philosophy, because now we have to deal with it in this philosophical context. We cannot say anymore, well, he has private feelings, bad feelings. Everybody has some private bad feelings and so on. That's not the point anymore, I guess. And this is the problem.
As you well know, and we're going to go through some of these examples in a second, the total, at least in these 3 volumes, which together are what, about 800 or 900 pages?
1,200.
Yeah, okay, 1,200 pages.
Yeah.
There's about 5 paragraphs that mention the Jews. Is that correct?
Oh no, it's maybe 12.
12. 12. And I guess I'm wondering, so what you just said, if I understand it, is that these 12 paragraphs, these 12 ideas that we're going to read about in a second, potentially contaminate the thought.
Yeah.
But as you also write, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, there are many more mentions of other examples besides Jews that he thinks this historical thinking is based on.
Yeah.
Americans, Bolsheviks, English, etc.
Yeah.
Even Nazis at times.
But they are all, of course, they are all connected to Jews, to world Jewry. So that's an interesting point. But we can discuss it later.
Okay. So we should discuss it. I just wanted to. So the contamination, as far as I understand it, here is the contamination from world Jewry, not from a general thinking of science philosophy. I think the connection you want to make is that world Jewry is in a sense, prime historical example of what he means the abandonment of being.
Yeah.
Is that the claim you want to make?
What he calls, for instance, I don't know, is it rootlessness?
Rootlessness,
what he calls
yes.
homelessness, rootlessness, all in a certain way features of modern existence in a certain way. Yeah? That's in this here the world Jewry comes into play. And this is the point. Yeah. But by the way, I just want to say something. sometimes people are saying, and belongs to the strategy to apologize, Heidegger, to say, well, there are only 12 passages in 1,200 pages, and he is attacking everything. He is even attacking art history or something. That's the worst of everything. That's the most nihilistic thing of all the things we can imagine. This is the sound of this book, so art history. So in this respect, one could say, why not the Jews at this point? And this is, well, this is another argument, but I just want to say that quantity is never, of course, never a philosophical argument. In philosophy, sometimes you have one or two quotations. For instance, in just an example, in the studies of Platonic philosophy, the so-called unwritten theory, the so-called unwritten doctrine of Plato is a way of interpreting Plato since generations of philologists and of philosophers, and you have only, I guess, 3 sentences.
And Heidegger is a master
or
of
words,
interpretations.
And so quantity is never a philosophical argument in this case.
So good. One of the sentences from the Schwarz and Hefton that you discussed early on in your book is this quote from page 66 of volume 94. Müssen wir heute am Ende mit dem Philosophieren abbrechen? Do we need to today break away or stop philosophizing? Because Volk und Rasse ihm nicht mehr gewachsen und seine Kraft dadurch nur noch mehr zerfasst und zur Unkraft herabgesetzt wird. So, because folk, I'm not going to translate, and race are no longer grown into philosophy, are no longer capable of philosophizing, and its force has been frayed and sunken into lack of power. And then he says, or is this stopping or ceasing to philosophize not even necessary because it doesn't happen anymore, philosophizing and thinking. I take this sentence, while it has a lot of different valences, to be important in your reading because of its claim of Volk und Rasse, and the idea that there's this historical narrative that we talked about in the first quotation, and that in this time in the 1930s, Heidegger is trying to develop what you call this historical narrative of the 2 beginnings, and in a sense, there's a narrative of decline, right? Or concerned with technique or Machenschaft, which I don't know how to translate, and then on the other hand, a rebirth of the second beginning.
Yeah.
And since that's so important to your reading of Heidegger, I thought we'd just pick that one quote out and ask you to do a little bit of explaining the context of his philosophy and how that fits into his philosophy here.
Yeah. So you know that actually this is a strange point in Heidegger's thinking. In Heidegger's thinking, in the whole Heideggerian thinking, not only in the 30s, that he really thinks about the possibility that philosophy can become popular. He is marking the point that the Germans, there is another passage in the volumes, he's marking about the Germans admiring Max Schmeling, you know, he's this boxer, this champion, world champion boxer, and he is really asking why do they not admiring Nietzsche? Why are they admiring Max Schmeling? And you know that I thought before that actually Heidegger is really a little bit crazy in this point. So that's how can somebody think this way that, for instance, Plato or Hölderlin could become so famous like whatever Madonna or something, you know? And he really tries to think about it, and he's falling in despair about this folk who is not going this way. So but this belongs to the Heideggerian thinking right up from the beginning to the end. That he always thinks about the relation between philosophy and us. Who are we, for instance? And philosophy is the only and the first possibility to respond to this question: who we are. And he is that's even in the latest lecture calls, you see that he always tries to make this reference. I don't know why actually, but this is something what is very important for him. And here like I said before, he is inventing a new kind of thinking, metapolitics, to break up with philosophy. But of course, he is trying to ask himself whether the Germans really can take this task, whether they really can bear it out, whether they can really realize this second beginning. And you see that in the 30s and at the beginning of the 40s, of course, he begins to doubt it. And then he becomes, in a certain way, he becomes desperate because he sees that the people are still believing in Maximilian and not in Nietzsche, and this is for him it's a personal disaster in a certain way. But race, just to say something, race is of course a concept in discourses in the 30s. Where we see that Heidegger, on the one hand, is criticizing the vulgar concept of race, but on the other side, he sees, for instance, that Nietzsche is using the term race in a certain way, that, for instance, other intellectuals like Ernst Jünger is using the term race in a certain way, and that he tries to connect with this discourse. And he's, like I said, he's criticizing it, but he is trying to refer to it. And so we will, in a certain way, we could discuss, or we would have to discuss in the future the question, what is the signification of the Heideggerian concept of race? Because there is one, and the notebooks are showing that there is one. And we would have to discuss it, but it's, the philosophical discussion begins there. So, yes.
Okay, let's go on to the, there's five, Peter in his book actually argues that there's three different kinds of anti-Semitism, or in the Heidegger notebooks. We could limit it to three, but I thought I'd put up 5 quotes and allow us to discuss them. The first one, as I understand it, is along the lines of Jews understood as a tableau for empty logic and rationality. The quote is from page 46 of volume 96. Is it worth translating these, or should I? Yes? Okay. So the temporal increase in power of Jews or Jewishness or Jews is grounded in the fact that Western metaphysics, especially in its modern development, creates the starting point for the diffusion of a generally empty rationality and calculating capacity, Rechenfähigkeit, which in this way provides a refuge in Geist, or spirit, or intellect, without being able to grasp from out of itself the hidden regions of decision, Entscheidungsbezirke. The more original and captured in their beginning, anfängliche, the prospective decisions and questions, the more they remain inaccessible to this race. So there's a lot in here to chew on. One is the stereotype, as you put it, of Jews as a people of empty logic and rationality, people of the mind and not the heart. One put it in that quite an old stereotype. And another is this idea, which we go back to, of race and folk, and the idea of being anfängliche, the original, and anfängliche, die künftigen Entscheidungen und Fragen werden. It's hard to understand with Heidegger because Anfang is this sort of being caught up in one's beginnings or origins. It's not just a beginning, it's being caught in the sense of fängen. And that's why it makes it hard to translate Heidegger. The future decisions and questions. And so what he's saying is, he's asking, Heidegger is, that the Jews are these people who are not able to grasp from out of a time, the hidden, from out of itself, the hidden range of decision. They can't grasp today the decision to return to being in a kind of a new beginning, because they are captured in their original beginning, which is too logical and won't allow for the kind of experience of the mystery of being. Okay, in what sense is that an anti-Semitism? Let's start there. I just asked that, right? I mean, you claim this is the first type of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, well, the stereotype is clear that Jews are, that they have this enormous ability to calculate. Yeah, well, there is, of course, in a certain way, an historical explanation for this stereotype, but Heidegger is never mentioning this historical cause, this historical origin of this stereotype. But for him, it's quite clear, and it's not only in this passage, but in other passages too, that Heidegger, that the Jews can calculate very, very good, very brilliantly. The Germans doesn't calculate. Well, that's very strange, actually. Now that I call this being historical. You see that the point here that is referring to this being historical, metaphysical, being historical concept of history is that for him the beginning of modernity with Descartes is actually the beginning of this anti-logic or anti-rationality and this ability to calculate. And this is not wrong in a certain way, because mathematics becomes very important at the beginning of the modern times. In Descartes, for instance, the concept of matricis universalis, that everything can be calculated, and that the human being begins to possess the human being is maître et possesseur de la nature in Descartes, for Descartes, that master and what is it? Owner of nature. Yeah. So this is in a certain way that's not a totally weird interpretation of the beginning of modern times in a certain way. And in this sense, you can say in a certain way all modern thinking is calculating in a certain way. But of course, what is anti-Semitic here, I guess, is that he says all Jewish thinking is calculating. So this is, and therefore they can play an important role in this history. Mm-hmm. Therefore they can become very powerful. Therefore they have a certain relation to technology. And this is of course a strange idea, and I don't know how really he can come to this point, because of course he knows that mathematics was not an invention of modern times. You know, the Greeks invented mathematics in a certain way. This in a certain way he should have seen that his first beginning is in a certain way connected, the so-called first beginning, with mathematics, with the new mathematics in Greece. But he never saw that. He knew that. He says it sometimes. But if he what
already moved from
of course. So the Greeks actually they can calculate very
so
good.
He traces it all the way back.
Yeah, but the Greeks are they are all poets. They are never thinking about mathematics and so on. And this is in a certain way a strange strategy in this point, that he tries to include the word Jewry at this point in this history of anti-rationality and calculability.
Well, I mean, for Heidegger, Plato was the introduction of mathematics into philosophy. Only those who know mathematics can enter here.
Yeah, that's true. But he doesn't even mention Plato with it. But logos, for instance, that's a Greek word, of course, is a very important word for Heidegger, has a mathematical meaning in the Greek language. He never refers to this problem.
As I understand it, he does refer to in Plato, but he certainly refers to it in Descartes, as you said, in Leibniz, Kant, and many others. I guess I see the point, and I guess I want you to try and say more about why youth. I mean, he's clearly saying that Jews partake in this modern, technical, ruthless, rational world that has no access to being.
Yeah.
The question I think that you've raised, and I want to push you to say more on, is he saying that the Jews are the source of it, or the Jews are one of many people participating?
No, they are not the source. Like I said, that he's of course not the source. The beginning of modernity is always connected with Descartes, and there is a quotation in a very important text by Heidegger where he asks himself the question: is it possible that we have a Jewish what is it, physics? German physics, that was a physicist. That you know that this was an idea of the Nazis, that we can make this difference between an experimental theory of physics and a mathematic one. And he says that this difference is not true. It's impossible because the modern times begins with this project of a universal mathematics, and this is referring to Descartes quite clear. So the Jews are not the inventors of technology. That would be too crazy. They are not the inventors of technology, but because they can calculate so brilliantly, they can play an important role in this modern times, in the history of the 20th century and the 19th century. That this is the point.
We'll go on to the second of the mentions. And I'll just read a translation, and those of you who want to read the original, it's up on the screen. The Jews, with their marked gift for calculating, live already for the longest time according to the principle of grace, which is why they are resisting its consistent application with utmost violence. The establishment of racial breeding does not stem from life itself, but from the overpowering of life through Machenschaften technique. What Machenschaften and racial breeding pushes forward with such a plan is the complete deracialization of all peoples by constricting of them into a uniformly constructed and tailored institution of all beings. At one with deracialization is the self-alienation of peoples, the loss of history, that is, the decision regions of being. So I title this in a silly way, the race principle and its exception. In the sense that, as I understood, your take on this was the Jews stand for the principle of race, but also, in a sense, insofar as they stand for the, as part of the Wissenschaft, the deracialization of people.
Yeah, that's a strange.
They are a strange exception to the principle of race.
Yeah, that's a strange passage because in my eyes, there's a contradiction in it, and I cannot. For me, it's very strange to interpret this, but nevertheless, we will have to speak about two parts, both parts of this quotation. And I guess that the first part is really quite violent and very problematic about these. How do you translate it? Uneingeschränkte Anwendung.
Unlimited application.
Yeah, because what he is claiming here is that, well, he's claiming actually that the Jews are realizing this principle of race as that they invented in a certain way this life on the basis of this principle of race, and that in this respect, of course, and this is you cannot avoid this interpretation. The National Socialists actually are only doing what the Jews did long before. Yeah, and well, this is the problem, I guess. That's already a problem. And then he says, This is because, and I don't understand this because, actually not very good. It's not, for me, it's not, where is the cause and where's the effect? Therefore, they are trying to avoid these uneingeschränkte Anwendung. And the uneingeschränkte Anwendung, in this quotation is from 1939, probably, 38, 39, after the so-called Reichskristallnacht, after the November 38. And he saw what was happening on the streets. He saw that the synagogue in Freiburg burned down. It was quite close to the university, 100 meters. So he knew actually what was happening there. So one could ask the question, what does it mean, uneingeschränkte Anwendung? That's because we knew that 1935 we have this Nürnberger Rassegesetze, but I guess that this is not uneingeschränkt because this is something what refers to certain yeah.
Well, there's another interpretation, totally in a different context.
Okay.
Maybe I'm off, but I'll at least offer it and you can tell me if it makes sense, which is that the Jews, in order to be Jews, had to maintain that Jews would remain Jews and thus separate in some sense. Mm-hmm. To that extent, they cannot apply in an unlimited way the law of deracialization, because then they would commit self-sacrifice. And so the Jews are a contradictory people. This is not, Heidegger is certainly not the only thinker of this time to be making this argument, that on the one hand they have to claim a principle of race, and yet in the march of equality and history and technique in his sense, races will disappear. And that Jews have this special claim to being the people that both claim race and also claim to be immune to the deracialization of modernity.
Yeah, that would be nice, but I guess, well, the deracialization is not an application of the principle of race. That's a contradiction, I guess. You know,
yeah.
Deracialization
is
not.
Yeah,
and it's a principle of non-race in a certain way. You know that. I guess that. Therefore, I really don't know how he can connect these both thoughts, because the deracialization of the people for him has a clearly negative connotation, because he says something, with deracialization there is a self-alienation of the people, and this is the loss of history. This is the worst for Heidegger, to lose history.
Yeah.
So in a certain way, deracialization of the people for him is a negative term. But how can this connect to the first half to this quotation? I cannot understand this, because the Jews, they cannot make both in a certain way. They cannot invent the principle of race and then the principle of deracialization in the same time. Yeah, that's what he is trying.
That's what he wants the Nazis to do too.
Yeah. That's the Nazis. Yeah, but this is strange also, you know.
Yes.
So
as Arendt says in the Origins. So
it's
the Nazis
we can only try to whatever rescue this quotation. If we think about a special concept of race Heidegger has for his own, you know, a positive concept of race Heidegger has for his own, then we can understand this whole phrase. But we don't have this positive concept of race in Heidegger. It's not clear in Heidegger. So this thing is very strange. But I guess the one of the most problematic phrases is that he speaks about this uneingeschränkte Anwendung, because we really have to ask what he is thinking. If it is not deracialization, what I don't think, what is it actually? Uneingeschränkte Anwendung des Rasseprinzips. What could that be? Well, there are people who are saying that that could be only destruction or something, but I don't want to say that, and I don't want to think that, but there are people who are thinking that. Because you know that Heidegger later, he speaks about the fabrication of corpses, in 950 of course. And you shouldn't actually, as a Heideggerian, you shouldn't make this reference because obviously fabrication of corpses is uneingeschränkte Anwendung, limitless whatever application of principle of race. But actually, you cannot touch it as an Heideggerian because this is too much. This would be too much. So I tried to stay and to ask what should that mean. I cannot understand it.
We can maybe talk about it also in a second, Kyle. I just want to put some ideas out. Our time is somewhat short, so I'm going to go on to the next one. World Jewry as a metaphysical question, not a racial question. You've already touched upon. I'll read a translation of this as well. Can you see it?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. Also, the idea of an understanding with England in terms of the distribution of imperialist prerogative misses the essence of the historical process which is led by England within the framework of Americanism and Bolshevism, and at the same time world Jewry to its final conclusion. The question of the role of world Jewry is not racial, but the metaphysical question of the type of humanity that can accept the world historical task of uprooting all beings from being. So maybe you can say a little bit about what this means when he says that the question of world Jewry is not racial but metaphysical.
Yeah, because that's obviously that the task of the world Jewry cannot be grasped in a racial way, but in this way that he speaks about these strange task of this boundless, how do you translate it? Entwurzelung alles sein?
Uprootedness
of all beings from being. Well, we know that all these stereotypes of homelessness of the Jews, that they are in a certain way worldless, that they don't know what it does mean to dwell on earth and so on. We know these stereotypes, and then he whatever he thinks that world Jewry has a being historical task, and this task means, to uproot or whatever all beings from being, and this is actually the worst you can do in Heidegger. Actually, you can if you really have this power that you can really work for the uprootedness of all beings from being, then that's actually really something very, very powerful in this context. And I have to ask for this IE, das heißt, of Americanism and Bolshevism, and then he says IE. But does this IE means? Does it mean that behind Americanism and Bolshevism we have the more powerful group of world Jewry? So that's the question. So just to ask, what does it mean IE there? And I guess that actually we have different passages where you can say that Heidegger thinks in a certain way that behind Bolshevism and Americanism there is this there is world Jewry or world Judaism. I don't know what does it mean. And this is a point what makes it really very uncanny. I have to say that. I'm claiming in this book, maybe you will refer to it, I don't know, but I think that the protocols of the elders of Zion are behind this.
Has he read? Do we know how much he's read the protocols?
Now, but this is another strategy that people are in the discussions in Germany. They are attacking my interpretation. They're saying, well, we don't have a proof that Heidegger read the protocols of the elders of Zion, and that would be very funny to say that only one who had read Mein Kampf is a Nazi. If you really would say this, you really reduce the number of Nazis in Germany in one brilliant decision, and this is rubbish. You can. He was listening to the speeches, to the lectures, speeches of Hitler, and Hitler, of course, was using the protocols of the Elders of Zion for his rhetorics, and therefore it's not necessary that he must have read the but it's the point in German that people are trying to defend Heidegger to say that he never read, but he read, of course, Mein Kampf, and if I would be in a certain way this kind of philological, what is pseudo-philology in my pseudo-philology in my eyes, I could say, well, we have the protocols of the Elders of Zion in Mein Kampf, and he read Mein Kampf.
There's a couple more quotes, but we have about 5 minutes, 6 to 7 minutes left. Maybe I should take some questions. What do you think, Christoph? Let's open it up.
What do you have? Maybe
I'll put the book. One is.
Well, this is one we should read.
Okay, let me read this one then. This wasn't one of the 3 that you had made.
Yeah, I know. It's too much, but
I thought it was important.
Maybe this one.
This is important. Yeah. So we'll read this one. World Jewry incited by immigrants allowed to leave Germany is pervasive and impalpable. And even though its power is widely spread, it doesn't need to participate in military actions, whereas all that remains to us is to sacrifice the best blood of our own people.
The best blood of the best of our own people.
I'm sorry. The best of the Eigenes folks.
Hyperbolic.
Sounds like Hitler.
The best actually.
No, but just that's strange reference. The best blood of the best, that's whatever.
Is that talking also about his sons, you think, or not?
Now, you have to be aware of the fact that all these anti-Semitic quotes and passages are appearing in the context of the Second World War. That's true. And his sons were soldiers, of course, and he was caring for their destiny, of course. So that's true.
So would you say a little bit about? Obviously, this is an important quote.
Yeah, because it has something to do with his nearly in a sort of paranoid relation to world Jewry. That he says, for instance, überall unfassbar. I don't know how you translate. Did you translate everywhere ungraspable? No, everywhere
Incomprehensible.
Impalpable, I said, but I mean ungraspable, unknowable.
That's strange, that he thinks that, and this is really an idea of the world, of the protocol of the Elders of Zion, that world Jewry has the power to control world history without even appearing as such, and that they, like I said before, that Americanism and Bolshevism and so on is actually only different forms of world Jewry. Here you can see in a certain way that he really, at this point, I guess, was thinking this way, that he thought that the Germans were that the true enemy of the Germans actually was world Jewry, and not the Russians and the Americans, and the English, because they all were different appearances of world Jewry. So therefore, I guess that this is a.
Okay, I thought it would be really helpful for this discussion, which has often been in vague generalities, to put a couple of quotes up, which we've done. We've had Peter talk about them. We're open to a couple of questions. Please do keep your questions brief and in the form of a question, and we will proceed from that. Bernie.
I guess the question is,
If you speak in your microphone.
if I understand Roger Berkowitz correctly, you're suggesting in the beginning that Heidegger has this conception of the history of being as the history as loss of being, as forgetfulness of being, all of which is elaborated in his published writings with no reference whatsoever to Jews. Worldlessness, he says Descartes' concept of subjectivity is worldless. Kant is a worldless doctrine of subjectivity. And it seems to me really odd that if the Jews are so central to this, why doesn't he mention them? I mean, not the doctrine of a double writing, because Strauss would say, why Plato writes that way is for fear of persecution. But on the contrary, where anti-Semitism was the lingua franca, he would have even more celebrated had he made the Jews more central to the concept of the Zionist machine.
Yeah, a good question. I don't know actually. No, because you know that even the notebooks were secret writings. He never showed it to somebody. It was only shown to some mistresses and to the inner circle of the family. So it's a good question. Why was he not publishing his anti-Semitism in the Third Reich? You know it's this crazy idea that he made a secret out of this in a totally anti-Semitic milieu. So that's a good question, but I don't have a good response to this. I don't know. There are some, but by the way, there are some other quotations, or at least one in a being historical text. Yeah, and yeah, but you are right. He was not speaking in the public sphere about his anti-Semitism.
Question. Could you use the mic, please?
I've seen a distinction made between demonizing Jews as people who are evil, which is anti-Semitism, and identifying certain philosophical approaches as Jewish as opposed to non-Jewish. You mentioned non-Jewish is more spiritual, more of the heart. Jews are materialistic and rational. And I've seen people speak of anti-Jewish thought where Christians would criticize other Christians because their philosophical approach was too Jewish. I've heard it said that Hegel thought Kant was too Jewish and Schopenhauer thought Hegel was too Jewish. All in terms of there being certain philosophical positions that were material or rational that those who had a different view wished to disparage.
Yeah, well, you know, what is the question could be that whether we have only some predicates here. Heidegger is referring to the Jewish whatever people, and that this is not really anti-Semitic. Yeah. Well, you know, yeah, well, for me, I guess you know that I guess Hannah Arendt is saying this at one point. I don't know where, but she says that actually before the Shoah and the Holocaust, well, you could have been an anti-Semitic or anti-Semite in the 19th century. It was a possibility to criticize the Jews with these kind of predicates. But I guess that we have here now philosophical statements close to the Shoah, and Heidegger was the witness of the beginning of the what is persecution of the Jews, and therefore I guess that these predicates are not so harmless anymore, not so easy anymore. Close to what happened on the streets of Germany, we really have, I guess we have a different context here.
Does it matter that they're in public and private as opposed to in public? I mean, to go back to the first question you heard. He didn't make these statements about Jews in public, as far as I understand.
Well, the point is, he didn't make it in public, and he had, of course, Jewish mistresses. You're not only one, just to say that. But and he had Jewish friends and so on. He was not behaving very bad against Jews. But this is something what we can find in Heidegger at every point. For instance, he is criticizing Ernst Jünger very much in his writings, but he's his friend. So that at this point, that doesn't. I don't think that this is a very strong thing. But one point is that we maybe could consider again, just to say that we have this discussion. What is actually the relation between Heidegger and his old teacher Husserl? Husserl, of course, was Jewish when he was a Protestant Jew, but whatever. And it was always the explanation of Heidegger and his strategy to interpret himself at the beginning of the 30s was that he had some philosophical differences with Husserl, and these differences were not anti-Semitic. But of course we have letters by Husserl where he says that clearly that Heidegger that he has anti-Semitic reservations against him. We have some letters, and we have, for instance, the quotation where he thinks that Husserl is part of this history of empty logics and calculability. So if we think about this, we maybe should ask ourselves whether his kind of making university politics in 33, 34 is already in a certain way is already influenced by a certain anti-Semitism. But we have to be careful. But that would be certain. That would be in a certain way the only way a philosopher deals with it. You know, if we have a philosophical anti-Semitism, why not think about seeing Heidegger as a director of the University of Wuppertal doing university politics on this with this background? I guess that this is not impossible.
It strikes me as, at this point, hard to deny, and not worth denying, that Heidegger had, as you said, a couple of anti-Semitic stereotypes and believed them, and was anti-Semitic in his personal life. Inconsistently, we can say, in the 30s.
Yeah.
That's undeniable, I think, at this point. I think the question you raised, and the more interesting question, at least from some of our point of view, is what that means for his thought. And other, Roy, Sam? Wait for the microphone, please.
Just to come back to the issue raised in the first
Can you
question.
speak in?
And come back to the issue raised in the first question about the fact that Heidegger wrote Deleuze on the topic of censorship without mentioning any of these particular themes. My question is, then in what sense is it that the philosophy of the censorship or this later thing is contaminated by these other writings where it would seem that, at least by all appearances, they're not contaminated, right? It didn't seep into it, at least explicitly. So is the contention that Heidegger's way of thought cannot be adequately understood philosophically without the completion of the material that you're highlighting?
Yeah, I don't know really. That will be one part of the discussion. For instance, well, contamination. Just to say that, it means in the Latin language just like something like to touch with. That's the literally translation of this word. So I would ask myself, what is also touched through these anti-Semitic passages, and where can we say here does it end, and this is a clear cut, and then we have something different. Well, if he, for instance, in the 50s, if he speaks about calculating thinking, and that's one term he's using then. Well, I don't know. That's only a question. I don't have an answer. Whether we can read these passages without thinking that the Jews have this ability of calculating. I don't know. But this is only a question. And like I said before, we are standing at the beginning of the philosophical discussion of all these questions. So this is what just one point.
But you argue in the book that it does lead to the contamination of the thinking.
Yeah, in this way that we cannot, that we have to deal with the question, what is the meaning of these anti-Semitic passages, for instance, in this point about, for instance, worldlessness or uprootedness. These are terms Heidegger are using in his critique of modernity, but very often. So,
But you're not, just a question, are you suggesting that anyone who uses the terms worldlessness or rootedness would have a problem with contamination? And especially if there's someone like Hannah Arendt who was influenced by Heidegger in her thinking? Because much of her thinking uses the terms worldlessness and rootlessness.
yeah. Well, I don't think that. Of course, I guess that you can go on using these terms because it's a part of a certain critique of modernity. But what does it mean, for instance, in the Heideggerian context, especially in the Heideggerian context, if we could say that everything what stands for modernity and what is criticized and denied by Heidegger, everything is inscribed to world Jewry. What would it mean that the Jew is the modern human being for Heidegger? And therefore, in a certain way, he's the representative of an existence he denies with every single thought of his philosophy. That would be a problem, maybe.
It would be.
Yeah.
We'll take one more question. Sitting down, I can't. Yes, you, but I can't. Yes.
Okay. To what extent would you say has Heidegger's view of the Jews as calculating, mathematically orientated, and so on, been influenced by Edmund Husserl, his underappreciated predecessor? What does he say specifically about Husserl, who is, after all, the author of the Cartesian Meditations?
Yeah. Well, Husserl was a mathematician, of course, yeah. But Heidegger himself studied mathematics. So I really cannot. Maybe that I don't know. I don't know whether I could say that we don't have enough material here to think about this question, but I wouldn't go so far. I wouldn't go so far that Husserl is the model for his anti-Semitism. I wouldn't go so far.
Okay. So first of all, please join me in thanking Peter Trawny for